Hi there and welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Ryan Nobles in Washington, and the 2024 presidential tickets are now set as Vice President Harris announced today that she's tapped Minnesota Governor Tim Walz to be her running mate. Walz and Harris will appear together for the first time at a campaign rally in Philadelphia less than 90 minutes from now. It is the first stop on a multi-state tour that aims to introduce the Harris-Walz ticket to battleground voters. Ahead of tonight's rally, the campaign released a video showing the moment this morning that Harris calls Walz to tell him he had the job.
Hi, this is Tim.
It's Kamala Harris. Good morning, Governor.
Good morning, Madam Vice President.
Listen, I want you to do this with me. Let's do this together. Would you be my running mate and let's get this thing on the road?
I would be honored, Madam Vice President.
The joy that you're bringing back to the country, the enthusiasm that's out there, it'll be a privilege to take this with you across the country.
The 60-year-old governor is a former school teacher, National Guardsman, and congressman. He grabbed the spotlight recently as one of the first to label Trump as, quote, weird, a line of attack that Democrats quickly and widely adopted. The Trump campaign today slamming the choice in an attack ad, painting Walz as, quote, dangerously liberal, while also trying to reignite divisions inside the Democrat Party on the issue of Israel, suggesting that Harris was pressured away from selecting Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro because of his Jewish faith. Here's Trump VP nominee J.D. Vance speaking to reporters in Philadelphia ahead of the Harris rally.
Tim Walz's record is a joke. He's been one of the most far-left radicals in the entire United States government at any level. But I think that what Tim Walz's selection says is that Kamala Harris has bent the knee to the far left of her party, which is what she always does. Kamala Harris listened to the Hamas wing of the party. Kamala Harris is running as a San Francisco liberal. She is governed as a San Francisco liberal, and she's chosen a running mate who will be a San Francisco-style liberal. The biggest problem with the Tim Walz pick, it's not Tim Walz himself, it's what it says about Kamala Harris, that when given an opportunity, she will bend the knee to the most radical elements of her party. That's exactly what she did here. That's what she's going to keep on doing as president.
With less than 3 months until Election Day, one of the biggest challenges for the Harris campaign will be trying to leverage Governor Walz's biography to make inroads with battleground voters while introducing him to the country. And they will have their work cut out for them. A new poll shows that 70% of registered voters have never even heard of or don't have an opinion on Walz. And neither did some of the voters our NBC team talked to today in neighboring Wisconsin.
I honestly don't even know who that is. I guess no reaction. I don't pay attention to politics like I should.
I'm not too educated on him or anything he's really done.
I don't know, because I never heard so much about him.
I haven't dug deeply into her VP picks, so I will be doing some research when I get home this evening.
So who is he? NBC's Gabe Gutierrez has more on who Tim Walz is.
A working-class politician from a rural background, Minnesota's Tim Walz is known for not pulling punches.
This is not about the Second Amendment. This is about the safety of our children and our communities.
A self-described white dude for Kamala Harris, the popular governor will now run alongside the nation's first woman of color atop a major party's ticket. Walz grew up in small-town Nebraska and joined the National Guard as a teenager. He'd serve in the National Guard for more than 2 decades, eventually becoming a school teacher. After moving to Minnesota, he volunteered for John Kerry's presidential campaign, and in an upset, he was elected to Congress in 2006. Walz served in Washington for the next 12 years, establishing himself as a moderate Democrat. Then he ran for governor in 2018, winning in a landslide.
The process of how we as a state and how we as a nation respond to these things is really important.
2020 would bring defining moments, the COVID pandemic and the killing of George Floyd, which triggered riots and criticism from Republicans over why it took Walz 3 days to call in the National Guard.
Decisions were made in a situation that is what it is, and I simply believe that we tried to do the best we can.
Walz's critics also point to a state audit report that found major failures by Minnesota's education department during the pandemic, allowing rampant misuse of a federal program meant to feed children.
If you commit fraud in Minnesota, you are going to be caught and you are going to go to prison.
Still, Walz has long had strong union support. The president of the United Auto Workers says he was among his top choices for VP.
I had an opponent who thought this was a real zinger when we were going at it. He said, Governor Walz is in the pocket of organized labor. And I said, that is a damn lie. I am the pocket.
Walz is also seen as an attack dog, not shy about going after former President Trump or his running mate, Senator J.D. Vance.
Well, it's true. These guys are just weird. And it's, you know, they're running for He-Man Women Haters Club or something.
Now, the plain-spoken 60-year-old governor from the Midwest is set to join a historic national ticket. Gabe Gutierrez, NBC News.
All right, Gabe, thanks for that. Let's talk about it now. Joining me, Peter Alexander. He is on the ground in Philly ahead of tonight's rally. Garrett Hake is here. He has reaction from Trump world. And Steve Kornacki is, where else would he be? He's at the big board. Also with me, Symone Sanders-Townsend, the co-host of The Weekend on MSNBC and a former senior advisor to Vice President Harris. Well, let's go to the room where it's going to happen. Peter, you're in Philly. That's where we'll see Walz and Harris together for the first time. Just walk us through the internal decision-making process here when it came to picking Walz. What about the governor appealed to Harris as she made her choice?
Well, I think, Ryan, there were several key takeaways that appealed. Perhaps most importantly was the strong chemistry, that rapport that the two were able to build in the short time they spent together this past weekend when Walz, among other top contenders, visited the Naval Observatory, the vice president's residence in Washington, D.C. I've been told by multiple sources that that was a key factor here. But it's not just that. They talk about his bio. You've talked about his service in the Army National Guard for 24 years, his 12 years in Congress, winning a Trump district, a red district, also those 2 terms serving as Minnesota's governor. They view that executive experience as something that will make him a good governing partner for Harris moving forward. Beyond that, it is that executive experience, most importantly, that they think puts him in a position to be competent and have the ability to lead. And then ultimately, beyond that, I think it is the sense that he has been an effective messenger to this point. You saw in Gabe's piece moments ago that he was the one who sort of coined that phrase describing Trump and Vance, not Republicans broadly, but the two of them as being weird, something that caught on for a couple of weeks, went viral, certainly across the Democratic universe, and certainly something that caught the eyes of Kamala Harris and her team. Ryan.
So after tonight, they're going to hit the road visiting a bunch of battleground states together, but I assume at some point they're going to separate. How does the campaign plan on utilizing Walz? Where do they see his strengths?
Well, as he described himself, he's a white dude for Kamala Harris, and they really hope that he has a particular appeal with his Midwest charm, as they describe it, in some of those key Rust Belt battleground states, the 3 states in particular there that they cannot afford to lose. Recognize that Democrats haven't lost Minnesota since 1972, but it's the states of Wisconsin next door, Michigan and Pennsylvania, notably, where they need to see success. That's going to be some of his first stops tomorrow in Wisconsin and Michigan alongside Kamala Harris. It's part of what was intended to be 7 states in 5 days. Now it's going to be 5 states in those 5 days. 2 of those events were postponed due to Tropical Storm Debbie, but it's certainly a place where they believe that he can communicate a good message. His rural sort of roots, they think, as a gun owner, a hunter, will resonate with some of those Americans in parts of the country that may have been disinclined to support for Kamala Harris.
And of course, you're in Pennsylvania. The governor there, Josh Shapiro, was considered to be the leading VP contender, probably the other option outside of Walz. He'll be at the rally tonight. We've seen other VP options also praising Harris's choice here. How important is this show of unity for the Democrats?
Well, it was remarkable how quick the unity sort of was presented by this Democratic Party. Recognized, Ryan, remarkably, it's barely been 2 weeks since Joe Biden dropped out of this race, to say nothing of the vetting process that normally takes months and had to be sort of squeezed into just a matter of weeks. The party has really united behind what has been a newly energized Democratic Party without Joe Biden at the top of the ticket. Kamala Harris instead. I'm looking around the room here where they're anticipating as many as 10,000 people to be here. You see some of those lights flickering on the wrists of folks. Those are the types of bracelets you see handed out at a Taylor Swift concert that turn off and change colors in unison here. So there is a very different energy, really night and day compared to what we saw just a matter of weeks ago. And it's something that Harris and Walz together are hoping to capitalize on.
All right, seems like this campaign is now officially off and running. Peter Alexander there for this kickoff for the Harris-Walz team. Peter, thank you for that. Let's bring in Garrett Hake now to talk about what's happening on the other side of the coin, and that's with the Trump campaign. They've already tried to pivot to try and make this race about Harris. How much will they use or not use Walz in making this comparison?
I think Walz is useful to them in the sense that it doesn't complicate their message, right? They can say that they can use Walz to amplify all the things they're already saying about Kamala Harris. If Kamala Harris is open borders, so is Tim Walz. If Kamala Harris is anti-police, so too is Tim Walz. If she is too far left, so too is he. Now, his record in the House certainly doesn't reflect that, but I think they will make arguments that the things he's been able to do with the Democratic trifecta in Minnesota, while popular there, are not things that the rest of the country will want. That's their hope. But beyond that, their response has been kind of rote today, to be completely honest with you. They have tried to paint him as a far-left liberal and Harris as a far-left liberal for choosing him, but they've not gone very much beyond that. I mean, Trump himself has said, in the context of his own vice president, that he doesn't think they mean very much to the ticket, and his campaign is certainly behaving like they don't think Walz is going to mean a lot when the votes actually start coming in on this race.
J.D. Vance used a term today that I thought was interesting. He said that Harris bowed to the Hamas wing of the party.
Yeah.
There's obviously this strain of questioning the pick because Josh Shapiro was passed over. He is, of course, Jewish. There was some reporting that may have been part of the conversation for the Harris campaign. I think that they have kind of batted that down. But Republicans are trying to amplify that. How much do you think that this will become part of their argument to try and sow some discord within the Democratic Party?
I think it's more likely to be a whisper campaign than it is to be the kind of thing they put resources behind or have the candidate or the VP nominee, for that matter, spend a lot of time talking about. But the idea that they might be able to drive a wedge into the Jewish vote around Harris and what she really thinks about Israel and Gaza and what the differences might be between she and Shapiro, I do think is something that some Republicans will try to exploit. I saw comments on X today from Republican strategists and influencers suggesting that maybe Shapiro should join the Republican Party because his views on that issue might be more aligned with Republicans. I'm not sure how far that will get, but it makes me very interested in what Josh Shapiro himself is going to say, not just tonight, but in the months that follow, because he's still an important surrogate, at least in theory, for the Harris campaign.
And also it doesn't really match the reality because Shapiro has been one of the biggest critics of Benjamin Netanyahu of anyone in the Democratic Party, where Walz has been somewhat friendly to Netanyahu. So, aside from the identity associated with it, that doesn't really connect there. But there does seem to be a bit of relief, maybe is the right word, among some Republicans that this pick is not coming from a battleground state. Were they worried that it would come from Pennsylvania or Arizona or somewhere like that?
I think a lot of Republicans thought that either Shapiro or Kelly, at least on paper, would be a stronger candidate. And time will tell. But, when I look at the history of this, and this is something you'll talk about with Steve Kornacki, having a battleground state vice presidential candidate certainly didn't help. Joe Biden didn't have one. Donald Trump didn't have one when he won. Barack Obama didn't have one when he won. The idea that this makes some big difference, I'm not sure is entirely borne out. But the idea that you can cause some chaos in the other party by suggesting, oh, man, we really dodged a bullet here because of who they picked or didn't pick, does make a certain amount of strategic sense.
Let's flip it then and talk about the fact that Donald Trump has thought that Minnesota's in play. How does that change the calculation?
I've covered multiple Trump rallies in Minnesota. I think it's a state that's sort of his white whale. It's the kind of state that he always thought he ought to be able to win. The demographics of it, he believes, absent Minneapolis, St. Paul, look a lot more like Iowa, a state where he really does well, than Michigan or Wisconsin, a battleground state where he's struggled. I would not be surprised at all to see Trump still go campaign in Minnesota because it means a lot to him. And I think because that's a sort of in his mind, a way that he can kind of show the dominance that he likes to project politically, that he's going to go into somebody's backyard and campaign. But, look, I think it probably remains just outside of his reach, as it has for the last couple of cycles, but we'll see.
He's also campaigning in Montana, which you think is easily...
critical battleground state, but does have a very important Senate race.
Right, exactly. All right, Garrett, thank you for that. Let's talk about the big board now and bring in Steve, as Garrett pointed out. Here's the question, Steve. I know you've probably explained this to death about the role that vice presidential candidates have on the top of the ticket. But my specific question is about new voters. Are they going to turn out now for Harris because of Walz's addition on the ticket? I mean, what's the coalition here look like?
Well, yeah, again, and like you say, the history of vice presidential candidates, I think they make the biggest impact often the day they're announced, and people speculate about what the impact will be. So that said, though, what you're hearing from a lot of Democrats here is the hope that broadly there's appeal that Walz brings to the ticket for those three Midwest states you talk about, Midwest, Big Ten states, however you want to define them, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. I think particularly Wisconsin next door to Minnesota, and Michigan a little bit too, just demographically. And I think in terms of of what impact, one way of looking at it, at least the potential impact of Walz, would simply to be, let's look at Walz's last campaign in Minnesota. For governor 2022, he got reelected by 8 points. But look at the distribution of the votes in the state, because Garrett was just talking about this. Minnesota, you got the Twin Cities area here. I draw a circle. Inside here is about 60% of the population of Minnesota. The rest of this is all what they kind of call greater Minnesota. And essentially, this is what we see in all states, or just about all states. The metro area around the big cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, is blue and getting bluer and bluer. Big population centers, lots of suburbs, lots of college-educated professionals. That's become a core Democratic constituency, especially in the age of Trump. And then greater Minnesota, it's a lot of small towns, it's a lot of rural areas, it's a lot of blue-collar voters. And this has, especially in the Trump era, I mean, you can see it. Look, all the red on here. It's moving more and more in the Republican direction. Just these two geographic units here are moving politically vastly apart from each other. We could talk more about it, I'm sure, over the next few months.
Well, but Minnesota, though, is Midwestern, but it's not a swing state in the same way its neighbors are. So, you talked about this. Is there a broader appeal there throughout that region that could help Democrats defend that blue wall?
Well, that's what I was about to get to. Was so the question then, when you look at this setup, becomes Democrats, we already know, in areas like the Twin Cities, in the Midwest and everywhere, Democrats have been doing great here no matter who they're running. So the question is, the areas of Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania that are like greater Minnesota, that's where they've been struggling, small towns, blue-collar areas. Did Walz do anything in greater Minnesota that suggests he defies those limitations on Democrats? And the answer really is you don't see it at all in 2022. I mean, what you see is that Walz ran up huge numbers in the Twin Cities and the metro area, just like Joe Biden did in 2020. They look very similar. And then when you get into greater Minnesota here, just for example, this is the kind of county we're talking about, where Democrats have been losing ground all around the Midwest. Walz loses Stearns County. This could stand in for dozens. He loses it by 23 points. When Joe Biden was running, he loses it by 23 points. This is the kind of place, let's turn the clock back a dozen years to Barack Obama running in 2012. This is the kind of place Democrats in the pre-Trump era, they weren't necessarily winning, but they were pretty competitive. And that was true in greater Minnesota. That was true in small-town Wisconsin. That was true in small-town Michigan. That was true in small-town Pennsylvania. That is where the floor has fallen out for Democrats since Donald Trump emerged. Now, Tim Walz won in 2022, obviously, but he didn't show any new strength in the parts of Minnesota where the Democrats have really fallen behind in the Trump area. And if you're talking about boosting the Democrats in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, you're talking about, can you do something in those parts of those states where the Democrats have been losing all that ground? Looking at what Walz did in Minnesota, you don't see that value add.
Okay. Steve Kornacki, thank you for breaking it down for us. We appreciate it. Let's turn now to Symone Sanders-Townsend, someone who once worked for Vice President Kamala Harris, so understands her thought process in something like this. I'm struck by what Peter said off the top of the program, Symone, about that meeting that Governor Walz had with the vice president, where she seemed to really come away from that meeting with a good feeling about the two of them as a partner and a governing team. How important do you think that meeting was in this final decision-making process?
I think the meeting was critical, honestly. Vice President Harris did not know Governor Walz well before. I think something folks haven't really mentioned throughout the day today is that Governor Walz is, in fact, the chair of the Democratic Governors Association, the political arm that is there to help elect Democratic governors across the country. And before you're the chair, you're the first vice chair. And so he had been involved with this White House and engaged. So, the vice president obviously knew him. They had a general working relationship, but didn't know him as well as, say, someone like Roy Cooper, frankly, whom she served when she was an AG in California. So that meeting was critical because if she's thinking that, okay, maybe this is someone I would like to work with, the chemistry that you have initially is quite telling. Folks say you will know when you get into the room, and the vice president is someone who she wants the staff and the senior advisors around her to give their opinion. She wants to know what the recommendation is, but ultimately she is going to make the decision. And I think the decision did come down because of the truncated timeline, right? The decision came down to taking a look at all of the vetting materials, taking the recommendations from the staff that they had, and it's my understanding that there were folks that came down on multiple different sides of different camps. But how did you feel when you sat down with the person? And also, what kind of governing partner do you think that person would be? You know, the reality here is that Vice President Harris, if she is elected to the presidency, she'll be a young president, someone who would obviously probably want to run for re-election. Do you want to pick a running mate that will eventually be your vice president that you maybe have to look over your shoulder at for the next 4 years, or someone that you believe is going to back you 100%, give you, you know, real honest feedback in private, but back you in public, regardless of what they may personally think? Frankly, the role of a vice president that she knows well, because she does that now for President Biden. And obviously, she came away from all of her meetings believing that Governor Walz could be that person for her. You never know for sure, especially not in this truncated timeline, but she went with her gut.
So the two biggest days for vice presidential candidates are today, the day that they're announced, and then the second would be a potential debate. There isn't one on the docket yet, but we assume that that's something that could happen down the road. What's your gut as to what a J.D. Vance, Tim Walz debate would look like?
You know, frankly, if the debate were held within the next week or so, and obviously there's not one that's currently negotiated, so this is not a real scenario, I think the debate what you would hear from Senator Vance would be very similar to what you heard from him in that press conference. I believe that Republican operatives and the Trump campaign specifically are just trying to throw things at the wall and see what sticks. That's what they've been doing as it relates to Vice President Harris. They really have not attacked her directly on the record. They don't have criticism of the Biden-Harris record as much as you hear criticism about you know, the fact that she's a woman or race, right? And similar with Governor Walz, J.D. Vance is just painted with a broad stroke brush there in the words that we heard from the presser. He also, you know, tried to inject some, what I would argue is just very disturbing language, frankly, about bowing to the Hamas wing of the Democratic Party. I would know that there's no Hamas wing of the Democratic Party. Hamas is a terrorist organization. So that, frankly, in the initial hours is what we've heard. Now, a vice presidential debate, Ryan, as you know, is very different than the presidential. Vice presidential debates, they're seated usually. It is a little more demurred. These are candidates that they probably don't cross on the campaign trail much, right? And there's usually only one of them. A presidential debate, and if this were a normal presidential election season, we'd had a couple of them, at least 3, maybe 4. We may not even get one. So Governor Walz has a record as having been a governor, a member of Congress, right, a teacher at one point in time, and some legislative accomplishments. Senator Vance does not have that, and therefore the depth, if you will, that Senator Vance could bring to what is a heavy policy conversation, because that is usually how vice presidential debates go, I don't know if it exists. So I don't actually know if we'll ever see J.D. Vance and Governor Walz sit down, especially if the top of that ticket, Donald Trump, is yet to agree to a debate with Vice President Harris.
Yeah, you're right. It probably will be difficult to have that without the former. Symone, thank you so much for your perspective. We appreciate it as always. Joining me now is Pennsylvania State Representative Malcom Kenyatta, who's in Philadelphia, where Vice President Harris and Governor Walz will hold their first joint rally. He's also a member of the National Advisory Board for the Harris-Walz campaign. Malcom, so great to have you. First, just give me your reaction to this pick by Vice President Harris. What do you think Governor Walz brings to the top of the ticket that maybe some of the other contenders did not?
You know, first of all, you just hear this energy right here in my legislative district in the heart of North Philadelphia. People are excited about this pick, excited about Vice President Harris, and excited about her bold vision for a future that works for all working families. You know, listen, how do you pick a scoop of ice cream, okay? There's no bad way to do it. You just go and pick your favorite. And that's what she did. She picked the person who she felt, as a vice president herself, was going to be able to back her up, to give her the good advice that she needs, and somebody with a record of accomplishment. This is somebody who has mirrored a lot of the accomplishments that we've seen in the Biden-Harris administration, capping the cost of insulin, universal background checks, somebody who understands foreign policy, somebody who has served in uniform, but somebody who at his core cares about working people, cares about working families, and that's what this energy is about here today.
There is some work, though, for the campaign to do, right? I mean, 70% of registered voters say that they've neither heard of Governor Walz or don't even have an opinion about him. Are you concerned that that lack of name recognition is going to require the campaign to do some work, especially when you have less than 100 days to go?
Listen, what I know for sure is that Governor Walz is ready. He is ready to do this. Vice President Harris is ready. And for the next 90 days, they're going to be all across this country talking about how we make life better for real people in their real lives. Listen, the reality is that no vice presidential pick in living memory, has, carried a state or a lot of this conversation. What we need is somebody who the top of the ticket feels comfortable with and who they feel like can not only help them win the election, but can help them govern. The good news for us is that Governor Walz can do both. He is somebody who's going to be right at home in rural Pennsylvania, where I spend a lot of time as a statewide candidate myself. He's going to be right at home here in Philadelphia in a couple of minutes where he takes the stage. And the question is why? Why? Because he is a teacher who has spent big parts of his career looking into the eyes of young people, arming them with the things that they need to go on and live a great life. He's somebody who served in the armed forces, standing up for our values, standing up for the American people in uniform. He is somebody who has achieved big things as a governor, and we are ready for him to join Vice President Harris. And as Chairman Harris just said over my shoulder, ready to prosecute this case against Donald Trump. Donald Trump was a failed president. He is a failed candidate. And, you can pick a bad vice presidential candidate, and we see that in J.D. Vance, sadly, every single day.
All right, but I understand you're excited about the governor from Minnesota, but there's got to be a part of you as a Pennsylvanian who's worked with Josh Shapiro to be disappointed that she did not choose your governor to be her running mate, especially given the fact that Pennsylvania is so close. What do you say to critics that argue she missed an opportunity here by putting your very popular governor on the ticket with her?
I would say this, that when you are the nominee, you get to pick. And she got to pick amongst a bunch of great options. Listen, Governor Shapiro is my dear friend. And a part of what I'm happy about is that now folks all across the country have gotten to know him, gotten to know his record, gotten to know what we've been doing here in Pennsylvania, passing the largest investment in K-12 education, beginning the process of canceling medical debt, making it easier for people to start a business and to raise a family. So, I'm excited that he was a part of the process. I'm excited that the country got to know him a little bit the way that we know him here in Pennsylvania. And I am confident that he is going to go all across the Commonwealth, making the case for the Harris-Walz ticket. And we are going to win Pennsylvania. You mark my words. Governor Walz brings that Midwestern vibe that we love in Western Pennsylvania and love across the other battleground states that are in the blue wall. He is ready to talk to the voters that I meet every single day who are sick of the noise and the division and want a common sense, reasonable person to walk across the aisle to get things done. Governor Walz can do that. Governor Shapiro has done that here in Pennsylvania.
So what do you make, though, of the Republican criticism that the vice president didn't choose Governor Shapiro simply because of his religion, because Shapiro's received some criticism from progressives over his position when it comes to the Israel-Hamas conflict? What do you say to people accusing of the vice president of caving to these progressives and that perhaps one of the reasons that she didn't pick him is because of his faith?
One of the things that I would say is never take advice from Republicans. These same people who are talking about who Vice President Harris should have picked, they picked Donald Trump, the worst presidential candidate and the worst president that we've seen in living memory. So I'm not going to be taking advice from them or taking criticisms from them seriously. The vice president, first of all, is married to a Jewish American. And so this abhorrent idea that she is somehow anti-Semitic is vile and disgusting. Donald Trump is the person who's questioning her race, questioning, as he did with Barack Obama, her ability to be president, engaging in the type of racist vitriol. Yep. Donald Trump was literally just on a live stream with Aiden Ross, who has platformed multiple white supremacists and anti-Semites. And so we're not going to be taking advice from Donald Trump or from Republicans. When Republicans say do something, you take it with a grain of salt. We are going to beat them like a drum, and I'm excited to do it.
Okay, State Representative Representative Malcom Kenyatta, who is at the site of that rally with Kamala Harris and her new running mate, Tim Walz. We appreciate you being here, Malcolm. Thank you for that.
Anytime, thank you.
Up next, Republicans ramp up their attacks on the Harris-Walz ticket, calling the duo, quote, dangerously liberal. Presidential candidate turned Trump candidate campaign surrogate Vivek Ramaswamy joins me next. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. The race to define Tim Walz is on. As we noted, the Harris campaign is out with a video detailing the Minnesota governor's biography and accomplishments. But the Trump campaign is out with one of its own. Take a listen.
Kamala Harris just doubled down on her radical vision for America by tapping another left-wing extremist as her VP nominee. Tim Walz will be a rubber stamp for Kamala's dangerously liberal agenda. Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. They're failed, weak, and dangerously liberal.
Joining me now for The View from the Trump campaign is former Republican presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy. Thank you so much for being here, sir. And I do want to talk about some of the criticisms you had of the Trump campaign yesterday. This was one of them. You said that our latest strategy of repeatedly labeling Kamala a radical leftist will soon fall flat. And it's interesting because the first response for the Trump campaign today to Harris picking Tim Walz was to call him a radical leftist, as you saw in that video that we just played. Are you worried that this campaign's line of attack is a miscalculation?
So, look, one of the things I've also said is I believe that Josh Shapiro was going to be the VP pick. I was wrong about that. This was a decision that I think still is confusing to me that the Democrats have made, but provides a great new opening for the Republicans. I've been the first to say the last couple of weeks have not been our strongest weeks. This provides the much-needed reset that actually resets this race and opens up a clear path to victory for Republicans. The bottom line is this. Walz is a progressive when it comes to policy. He presided over the BLM riots in Minnesota, which he led. He favors health care for illegal immigrants. So let's have that debate on policy. And if we have that policy debate, believe me, the reality is going to be Republicans come out on the economy, on immigration, on staying out of foreign wars. And if this election is decided on policy, that's what this pick does. It refocuses the debate on policy. I actually think it strengthens Republican chances.
But do they need to do more than just labeling him a radical leftist? Do they actually have to talk about some of these policies as opposed to just playing the name game?
Yes, and we will, and we have to. I've been clear about that. We cannot just fall into the trap of criticizing the other side. And if we're calling it straight down the middle here, I tell you that this pick presents risks for Democrats and Republicans. The pick of Walz as VP presents a risk for Democrats that they lose centrist voters over a lot of his progressive policy positions. The risk I see for Republicans is that he is such a progressive, and he's far on the left of many of his policies, that it becomes tempting to just focus on him instead of offering our own vision of who we are and what we stand for. That's ultimately what's going to be required for us to win this election. Seal the border, end rampant crime, grow the economy, stay out of World War III, revive national pride in this country. These are things that Donald Trump stands for. These are the things that the Republican Party stands for. And I think we have to resist the temptation and risk to forget to talk about that because of the ripe criticisms that the other side makes it so easy for us to now level.
I mean, isn't the person doing that the least is the candidate himself, Donald Trump? It seems at most of his rallies, he spends most of his time just calling people names and complaining about past grievances. It's rare that he actually offers up policy prescriptions. Do you think the candidate himself needs to do that more?
So I respectfully disagree with your characterization there. Look at that debate, the one that actually turned this entire race around, the CNN debate. That was a policy-focused debate where, with all due respect, Donald Trump mopped the floor with Joe Biden. The reality is that was so much the case that they had to swap out Joe Biden as a consequence. So I do think that Donald Trump cares deeply about policy. The dirty little secret, if I may, in this race is that between the two tickets here, between the two presidential candidates, Donald Trump is actually now the moderate on policy. You take the historical criticisms of the Republican Party, extreme positions supposedly on abortion, on gun control, on interventionist foreign wars. Let's just go straight down that list. Donald Trump opposes a national abortion ban against the will of many Republicans. He's taken a measured approach on gun control. He is against the Iraq war, and he's against other interventionist foreign wars. These are exactly the policy criticisms that Democrats have had of Republicans for years, yet Donald Trump is to the center of many Republicans on all of those questions. So if this race does, yes, come down to policy, I think it should be a hands-down victory, not just for Trump, but for candidates all the way down the ballot. And I think that's a big part of why you want to take Walz's selection. If I may just make this one point, because I think it's important. There's a little bit of a contradiction in how they're pitching him. On one hand, they say he's this Midwestern unifier. On the other hand, he is the guy who is leveling this charge of being weird on 70 million Americans on the other side. And I don't think you can have it both ways. I do think that that's divisive. I think it's the 2024 equivalent of Hillary Clinton's basket of deplorables. And I do think that that's going to come back to hurt Democrats if Republicans keep our eye on the ball. And that's what I'm urging us to do.
Well, then I want to get back to this idea of keeping the eye on the ball, as you rightly point out. And I would also point out that no one calls people names more than former President Trump. He does that on a regular basis, did that with Governor Kemp at his rally over the weekend. But it also seems as though that the former president is still pretty focused on Joe Biden. He claimed this afternoon that Biden would try and take back the Democratic nomination. He called out several Democrats' names in the process. Do you think that's where he wants to focus his policy right now?
Well, the reality is Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are part of the same ticket that leads this country today. She's trying to claim a lot of Biden's victories. So I do think it's fair game in a presidential election to say that that sitting president owns his policy record. And so does the vice president, who's now trying to take some credit, as much as she tries, for some of those alleged successes. Let's talk about the border. Let's talk about actually how even the stock market decline of the last week is undoubtedly correlated to at least increased expectations that the market has that Kamala Harris could be the president. So I do think that's fair game to look at the Biden and Harris regime or the administration as one ticket. That's how they've pitched themselves to their own voters. So I think it's fair game for Donald Trump to say that she also owns Joe Biden's policy failures. But that's a policy-focused discussion that I think is good. I think the country will be better off if this is an election decided on competing visions of policy for the future. I don't think it's going to be good if either side makes this about which side is weirder, alleging weirdness of the Republican Party. I just think it's divisive. I think it is a way of alienating whoever wins this election. It's going to cost 70+ million people to see themselves not as part of the same culture or country. Governor Walz is the one who started that. The reality is I hope Republicans are able to take a very different path to say this is who we are. And if we do, we win.
I mean, what you're describing, though, is not at all what Donald Trump has ever done over the course of his presidential or political career, for that matter. And you're asking him now to just completely focus on policy, not to call names, not to try and settle grievances from the past. We're 90 days out from this election. Obviously, you're calling for what appears to be somewhat of a different course when it comes to the campaign. Do you think there needs to be new leadership to try and encourage a more policy-focused campaign? Or is that impossible with Donald Trump at the top of the ticket?
Well, so look, I got to be very, very careful and precise in what we're saying here. What I'm going to say is that when the media puts Donald Trump into a corner, when the far left puts him into a corner, sometimes he's left with no other choice. When you have the other side alleging that you're weird and your people are weird, of course, the most natural charge is to say, well, you know what? We have a stronger case in return. You could think about refusal to define what actually a woman is. Refusal to say that men should not compete with women in women's sports, taking away gas stoves out of ordinary Americans' hands. If Republicans want to play this game, yes, I do think we have a stronger case to say the other side is weirder than we are. But I think the better way to go, and you do hear this from Donald Trump, I think the media doesn't often report on it. What does he say? He says success is unifying. Success will be our vengeance. And I think that's an important part of the message where that's a side of Donald Trump that the media doesn't often let voters see. I think people who have been to his rallies absolutely do take that message away. And I do think the more he leans into that message, one of the things you've been hearing him say even more that I love is it's not just about making America great again. It's about making America greater than we have ever been before, that success and ambition and excellence are our heritage. These are exact lines out of Donald Trump's speeches, not the ones that get reported on. Yes, I would say stick to those messages And I think we're going to revive this country and hopefully win this election. And dare I say, let Trump be the president who unites the country.
Okay, Vivek Ramaswamy, thank you so much for your time, sir. We appreciate it. We're going to talk more about this now. Joining me on set is NBC News' chief political analyst, Chuck Todd, and Eugene Daniels, the White House correspondent for Politico and an NBC News senior political analyst. Okay, so, Chuck. Nobody's covered more of these VP rollouts than you. Talk us down from this. We get excited for a day, but in the grand scheme of things, what's this really going to mean?
Oh, I think in 2 weeks, I think we're going to be talking. I think Vance is going to be more of a talking point than Walz, to be honest. I think that ultimately, look, Kamala Harris has a lot of blanks she's still got to fill in over the next 30 days. She hasn't had any interviews, any sit-downs. She does, at some point, going to have to answer questions as to why she was for fracking or against fracking. Now she's for it. All these little things that have been come up because it's been such a whirlwind of the last 3 weeks. And so I think when that starts to happen, that we start to dial back. But we are learning a little something about her in this process. Here's what I took away from it. I think she cared about party unity. I think she, we can have a debate after the election whether she should be worried about these things or not. But I am empathetic to the idea she just became the leader of the party in the last couple of weeks. The last thing she needs at her convention in 2 weeks is dissension over Gaza, school vouchers, immigration, which all would have come with Mark Kelly or Josh Shapiro. So I understand that decision of let's not do any harm, let's keep the party together. So I get the process there. I think some progressives are going to take away from this process, oh, she cares about what's happening on TV. She cares about who's defending. And I think this has always been something that the vice president's been frustrated with the Biden White House, that they don't care about this enough. And I think she sees Tim Walz as, hey, this guy's pretty good at pushing back at the right wing. And I think she wants a defender. She would have loved to have played that defender herself. She would have loved to have somebody defended her from Fox News attacks. And I think she's looking forward to that aspect. So I did learn something about her and the presidency I think that she wants to conduct here. I also think that, she believes she's ideologically in the middle of the Democratic Party, and she thought it was beneficial to pick somebody that she shares the same vision with. And I think it's fair to say her and Walz are on the same page.
So, Eugene, you wrote today, you called it Walz-mentum this morning. You can have
Walz
the trademark.
I can add Walz to Walz stuff.
You get the trademark on that. What could run out of gas sooner, though? Kamala Harris's sugar high or Walz-mentum? What are we talking about here?
It's unclear. So far the sugar high has lasted. But I think you're right on Walz and whether or not people are going to care about this in a couple of weeks, right? In a couple of weeks, we do have the convention, so they'll have a rollout of him. But it's going to be about her, right? The reason that you're hearing in the party is people being like, yeah, we wanted Shapiro, but we're happy it's Walz. We wanted her to pick, because people are looking at her as the solution, right? For Vice President Harris, and I talked to her team, people that were on her vetting, they were looking for, and she was looking for someone that she really got along with, right? And so on Saturday, when they were doing all these presentations about these three men at the end of the day, they said to her, we think that Walz may be the guy you have the most compatibility with personality-wise. Right. In the interview, she clearly felt that, right? That was something that was really important to her. She also really liked, like you're saying, that defender. They love the idea, even though Vivek Ramaswamy doesn't, that he went around and called Donald Trump and J.D. Vance weird. Right. That was something that ended up sticking, and that hasn't really been, it's really hard to define Donald Trump, and that he had an ability to do that. Yeah. He seems like a dad, right? Like a Midwestern dad, and they think he plays in Pennsylvania as well as Michigan and Wisconsin. You saw him in his video today, he had like a camo hat on, which is not very Democrat of him, right? They like that he went hunting, those kinds of things. And she liked that he had multiple terms as governor, right? That's what she was kind of looking for in her pick. Now, whether or not people are going to stay upset about or worried that she didn't pick Shapiro, because Pennsylvania is the whole ball game, right? If you pick Shapiro, you probably have a better chance there. But it seems to us that Shapiro, when we've been talking to his camp all day, he's going to do everything he would have done, if he was the running mate. He's going to be out there for it. He's going to be out there tonight at this
rally. And maybe Pennsylvanians want him to stay anyway.
Exactly, right? Like one of the things that he made clear to the Harris camp was that he wasn't sure if he was ready to leave the gubernatorial.
Only been there 18 months. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a legitimate concern.
Yeah, he's like, I just got here, and I really like this job. And also, let's be real, he has his own presidential ambitions. Right. It's not always clear that being vice president sets you up for the best success.
Historically, maybe it doesn't help, actually. What's interesting, I would like both of you to take on this. 70% of Americans say they don't know Tim Walz and don't have an opinion of him. Chuck, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, it all depends on who wins the race to define him a little bit, right? I mean, I think, you know, the same thing was likely said about J.D. Vance. Probably wasn't at 70, may have been at 65%. I think it's been a disastrous rollout for him. He's been defined negatively. He's got some negative ratings. I think Walz certainly has gotten, will have a small leg up right now. There's a little bit of positive vibes on the Democratic side. They're going to, like, Republicans were divided on Vance. I don't think you're going to have Democrats divided on Walz here. But look, I was thinking about this. The three finalists all had sort of the one thing that would quickly stick with voters that was going to get talked about. With Shapiro, maybe it would have been two things, but I think the one thing would have been I-95, and sort of that would have been the thing we all would have relitigated. With Kelly, it had been the border and being an astronaut. With Walz, it could be George Floyd. And I think you can make an argument that can help, in some cases, the Harris ticket, but it's also a conversation I don't know if they want to have. Right. I think it's pretty clear. I heard Vivek, and I know the Trump campaign wants to have a Black Lives Matter conversation and use Tim Walz as that on that front. If I were to say if there's one thing about Walz that if that becomes the defining moment of his time as governor for a majority of voters, I don't know if that's the definition that the Harris campaign's going to want to have, but I don't know if that's going to be the case.
Is that a problem for Republicans, though, Eugene, in that they seem to have a hard time all deciding how they want to define someone, and they just throw a bunch of stuff out there and hope what sticks?
Yeah, and that's new for Republicans, right? Usually they get all on one message, they kind of go forward. But as we've seen with ever since Vice President Harris took over this ticket, that Sunday even, they struggle to not only define her, figure out what the argument is about her. The same thing today with Tim Walz, right? What Vivek said sounds great, right? It sounds like exactly how Republicans, if they're really on the get together, they would want to do. It's exactly probably how what Chris LaCivita and Susie Wiles want, the people that run the Trump campaign. But this is about how Donald Trump is going to do that.
Tim Walz, by the way, Tim Walz, while he didn't have any hard races for governor, I'm not going to sit here and say he's governor. His races for House were difficult.
17%
right, and he went. They tried all of the, hey, you're a closet liberal, you're a real progressive. They tried all. He has some. It's one congressional district. I don't want everybody to go crazy that what it translates there. So in that sense, I think he is prepared for the onslaught. He's always kind of had to defend himself in quote-unquote enemy territory, right, when he was in a very purple district. So that experience, I think, will help him parry back some of the criticism.
Okay, we got to go, guys. Thank you. I appreciate it both. Chuck and Eugene, thanks so much for that. Up next, voters are responding to the Harris pick for vice president. We're live in battleground Michigan. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. There are certain figures in American politics who need no introduction, and then there's Tim Walz. Let's bring in NBC's Shaquille Brewster, who is in Detroit talking to voters about the VP pick today. Are Michiganders happy with this pick, the one that you've talked to, or do you have to explain who he is?
A little bit of both, Ryan. I'll tell you, I'm talking to engaged voters. These are people who came out to Michigan's primary. They're participating in this primary election. And among one person who told me they're undecided as far as what to do in November, she said there's a lot of research she wants to get into. But I want to play for you a conversation I had with two Democratic voters that kind of reflect the themes that I've been hearing from Democratic voters throughout the day here in Detroit.
I really did think that she was going to select the Pennsylvania governor.
Josh Shapiro?
Yeah, I was kind of surprised when she went with Minnesota, but, you know, I think they'll make a good team.
Who did you want?
I actually wanted Pennsylvania.
Why?
I did. I think because it's a big battleground state, so I wanted her to pick him.
What do you know about Governor Walz? How much have you...
I don't know a lot about him. I really don't know a lot about him. I'm really completely trusting her, you know, that she's making the right choice.
Were you following this process at all? Did you know the names?
The only thing that when I saw on TV this morning that he supports the $15 an hour minimum wage, it's just going to be hopefully a good vice president, you know.
One voter told me that they know he's from Minnesota and they know Minnesota is cold. So there's a lot more information they want to learn about him, Ryan. It just gives you a sense that there's an opportunity for both sides here to not only introduce Governor Walz to the country, but to define him as he's now on this national stage.
Okay, Shaquille Brewster, live for us in Detroit. No word on whether or not being from Minnesota and it being cold is good or bad for his chances, but nonetheless, explains a little bit about the situation.
TBD.
We appreciate it. Yeah, thanks, Shaq. Turning now to a major announcement by Attorney General Merrick Garland this afternoon. The Department of Justice has indicted a Pakistani national who has ties to Iran for allegedly plotting to assassinate government officials on American soil. A senior law enforcement official tells NBC News the former President Trump was one of the potential targets of the foiled plot. According to the indictment unsealed today, Asif Merchant spent time in Iran before traveling to the U.S., where he tried to hire a pair of hitmen to carry out the assassination plot. The hitmen, however, were actually undercover law enforcement officers. Attorney General Garland said today that there is no evidence of any links between this plot and the attempted assassination of the former president last month in Pennsylvania. Joining me now is NBC News Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delaney. And so, Ken, what more do we know about this foiled assassination attempt?
Ryan, Merchant was actually arrested the day before Donald Trump was shot in Butler, Pennsylvania, as he was trying to leave the country. But as you said, officials are stressing there is no connection. That's just a bizarre coincidence. But what is true, according to court documents, is that this man who had ties to Iran and was a Pakistani national came to the United States in April with the intention of orchestrating this elaborate murder-for-hire plot. And the first person he talked to about it either was or ended up being a confidential source for the FBI. So basically, turn him in right away. And after that, the FBI began a sting operation. And as you said, introduced him to people he thought were hitmen, but were actually undercover law enforcement agents. And so they have the whole thing recorded. They have evidence. They have a cocktail napkin with part of the scheme. What he said was he wanted them to steal information from a particular target. He wanted them to gin up protests in certain areas, and he wanted them to assassinate a politician, not named in this criminal complaint, but we're told by a senior official that among the potential targets was Donald Trump, because what this is Iranian retribution for the killing of Qasem Soleimani, that Quds Force general ordered targeted killing by Donald Trump. And this is one of a string of plots already uncovered attributed to the Iranians, including an assassination plot against former National Security Advisor John Bolton and a plot against an Iranian dissident in New York City. This is the latest, and Attorney General Merrick Garland said today that he believes that we haven't heard the last of this, that the Iranians will continue this, what he called brazen and persistent plotting. But in this case, this would-be assassin or orchestrator was quickly gobbled up by the FBI, and he is now in custody.
And very quickly, Ken, are these murder-for-hire plots? Is this something that we hear about often?
Well, this is, as I said, this is the latest. There have been several of these. And yes, what the U.S. government has said that this is an ongoing scheme by the Iranian government. It's not clear exactly what they're doing about it, but this is one of a number, only the latest. And Merrick Garland said potentially more to come, Ryan.
Okay, and this on the day we find out that Tim Walz has now gotten Secret Service protection. Obviously, the Secret Service under the spotlight, given everything that's happened with former President Trump and his assassination attempt. Ken Delaney, thank you for that report. We appreciate it. And we are back tomorrow with more Meet the Press now. But the news continues with Hallie Jackson right now. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.